Welcome to episode 151 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, you're going to hear a coaching call with a teacher where we explore this topic of what is considered enough lesson support and reteaching to help kids be successful. Visit truthforteachers.com to ask a question or to share your thoughts in the comments. This episode is brought to you in part by Brains On. If you've ever listened to podcasts with your students, then you know it's a great way to engage their minds and spark their imagination without relying on screens. And one great podcast to start with is a kids show called Brains On. It explores real science questions from kids. So they learn about things like how dogs have such a great sense of smell, what water's made of, how human voices make sound. Brains On has over 100 episodes, and it's previously won a Webby for Best Kids and Family Podcast. You can listen for free to Brains On, as well as a kids' history podcast called Forever Ago. They're both at brainson.org or wherever you get your podcasts. So today we're trying to tackle this question of what is enough? Am I doing enough? I think is a question that is perpetually weighing on teachers. And it's really a difficult question to answer. And I think it's hard to find advice on because no one wants to be accused of giving teachers permission to do less than what kids need. And no one wants to imply to teachers that they should be giving up on kids. I will say right up front that that's a fear of mine. I don't want anyone to ever walk away from a podcast of mine with that message. But yet, I think it's necessary to open the door for this conversation to happen publicly, because right now teachers are just sort of struggling with this on their own and coming to their own conclusions. So let's at least try to just bring this conversation to the forefront and try to flesh it out a little bit together. Now, back in season 3 in episode 5, I did an episode called When is it okay to say that you've done enough for a student? And that episode is related primarily to kids who have extreme behavioral issues or are multiple grade levels behind. And you find that you're focusing like 80% of your time and energy during class on a handful of students, and you're ignoring everyone else. So I encourage you to listen to season 3, episode 5, if you're thinking about a specific student right now, someone who is really sort of draining your energy and you feel like you're just giving everything to them and neglecting the rest of the class because of it. And you need to figure out where to draw some boundaries, what's actually enough. That episode may help. In this episode, we're focused more on what is enough in lesson planning and support, particularly when you do standards-based grading or mastery grading and you're required to keep reteaching and supporting kids until they achieve mastery. I think the dirty little secret in education is that not all students are going to achieve mastery on every single skill that we teach them. They're just not all ready for mastery at the same time because they're children and they're not programmable robots. And there's a lot of other factors at play too, including their own drive to master the content. It's really hard to learn something that you're not interested in learning, or when you're distracted by other things that are more important to you in that moment. The teacher doing more teaching is not always the answer. And that's the bottom line there. Sometimes kids need different solutions. So that's what I'm going to explore here in a coaching call with a teacher named Ericka. She's a graduate of the 40-hour Teacher Workweek Club, so she's already put a lot of strategies in place to streamline her workload and focus on what really moves the needle for kids in her instruction. Ericka's been teaching for 16 years, so she also has a lot of experience and she's a very talented instructor. Currently, she's teaching 6th through 8th grade science, but I think the conversation that we have will feel familiar no matter what or where you teach. I will tell you up front that the answer to what is enough in terms of reteaching and offering lesson support is not clear-cut. So you're not going to be able to fast forward and skip to an obvious solution that we arrive at. Instead, I want you to just listen in as we weigh various considerations and use this conversation that I had with Ericka as a springboard to help you reach your own conclusions about what makes sense for your teaching context. That's all I'm doing here. I'm just guiding her to reflect on what she's doing that is working for her students and what is preventing them from being more successful. And she's then determining for herself which solutions or interventions would be best. Because what kids need from us sometimes is not necessarily better planned lessons, more engaging or amazing lessons, or extra credit or tutoring. Sometimes what they need has very little to do with academics at all. So we want to explore all the different factors here and reach the conclusion that makes the most sense. I'll let you jump in here on the conversation at the point where she had just told me about this lesson that she spent all this time preparing, and she'd offered all this additional support and scaffolding and everything for her students, and it still wasn't enough to get them all there.
It was a lot. Mm-hmm. It was a lot. And you also have to understand that I teach at a STEM school, and our students have to score or earn 90% on all mastery assignments, final exams, etc., to master their classes. So there's so much preparation that goes in to be able to give them what they need to do that. And then once they do it, like once they do an assignment and they don't hit that mark, then we either reteach or give extra time for them to learn it or fix it. And so it's not like a traditional school where someone turns in an assignment and they get the score that they get. We always have to give them the opportunity to remediate and show their additional learning. Mm-hmm. So as a teacher, I'm not only prepping really good lessons, making sure that they have everything that they need, but I'm grading assignments once, sometimes twice, sometimes even 3 times over the course of a quarter.
So every student needs to get to 90%.
Yes.
Who do you think is putting in the majority of the work to get them there? Is it you or is it them?
It's me, and it shouldn't be, but we've not figured out systems and processes that make it where it's not like that. I mean, if you would talk to most of the teachers in the school, that's how they feel. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I've heard this before about mastery teaching. The tracking of the assignments and the reteaching and the going back through is a tremendous amount of work for the teacher. And some of the kids really benefit from it, but others of the kids sort of rely on that structure. Like they know if they're not going to pass the first time, the teacher is going to jump through hoops trying to make sure that they pass the next time. And I've even heard teachers say, my students don't even try on the first time I give a test because they know they're going to be retaking it over and over again. So they don't even study the first time around. Yeah. Do you see that with some of your kids?
Yeah. Again, there's a big gap, and it's a mindset for the students. We have those with the mindset that I'm going to give it everything I have, and then I'm not going to have to do a whole lot on the back end. I'll just see what little things I need to tweak. Then you have the other group that they don't even bother until they take it the first time and they figure out what it is. And so, I have a really rough reputation because I have really high standards, but I will give them things like study guides at the beginning of units, which are worth 2 bonus points if they have them done when they take their test. I will give them, we call them CYUs, their check for understanding questions, and their multiple choice, fill in the blank, true and false, anything that can be self-graded through a computer system. So I give them several of those prior to a summative assessment, and their goal is to get mastery on them. And again, you see the split, those that do the front-loading work and those that don't do the front-loading work. And again, so then you've got all this that still has to be done for those that do it and then those that don't do it.
So this group of students who doesn't do the front loading, who just kind of shows up and just does however they do that first time because they know they're going to get more opportunities, do they eventually get to 90%?
Some of them do, some of them don't. We work really hard to reach out to parents, get parent involvement. But I would have to say, no, probably most of them don't. And you don't want to give up on them. Mm-hmm. But at some point, I will back off and I don't work quite as hard. But that just feels wrong as a teacher.
Yes, I know what you mean, because then it does feel like you're giving up and you don't want to just leave the kids there. There's 2 things that I'm thinking about with this. First is that I think that not studying for that first test or not putting in a lot of effort right up front could actually be a valid learning style. It could be a valid approach to a problem. And if I were a student, I would probably do it that way, because to me, it wouldn't make sense to study and put in all this effort when I know I'm just going to be retaking it over and over again. Like, I would probably wait and just kind of show up and let me use it almost like a pretest. Like, let me see what I do know about this, and then I can see where to go from there. To me, it would feel like wasted energy. And I think there may be some kids who feel like that, who that is actually, it's almost a productivity strategy and it could serve them really well in the real world. That you don't necessarily need to do all these hours and hours and hours of prep before something. Show up, assess the situation then, and move on from there. So it could be that, some of these kids, the ones who are able to go on and master and who do care, that it could just be a type of learning style, the way that they approach this type of teaching. Does that make sense? So that's one scenario that I'm thinking of. And then for the other kids who it's not necessarily a conscious choice, it's not that they're saying, well, why would I bother to study? It's just, they're just not going to be putting forth the effort, and they're going to continue to not put forth the effort even during the reteaching, even when you're doing all these other things. That, to me, that speaks to when sometimes the teacher wants it more than the kids do. And you can't want the mastery more than the child, if that makes sense. So, and that's really tricky, because you can't put in more work than they are, because there's only one of you and there's so many of them. So for those kids, and I think those are probably the kids that are tugging on your heartstrings the most, because you feel like maybe if I just worked a little bit harder, they'd get it. Maybe if I just provided this extra little support, they'd finally be on board. They'd understand, they'd get success. And so you keep spinning your wheels trying to do more and more and more, hoping that it will eventually be enough for that group of kids. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that the group of kids that makes you feel like you get stuck in perfectionism?
Yes, because they're the ones that aren't, that don't always fill out the guided notes, that draw instead of participate in class. Yes, that's my group.
Mm-hmm. I think you will always have some kids like that.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
seems like normal teenage behavior. And I was that kind of kid. I was a terrible student. I wasn't interested in class. I drove my teachers crazy. I chalked the whole time. And, obviously I still went and made something of myself. I still was able to be successful, even though each individual teacher didn't necessarily get me to achieve the way that they wanted in their class. And at some point, I had to decide what I wanted. I had to want something for myself. And there was no amount of effort that a teacher would have been able to put in for me to get me there, because I just wasn't at that age or in that class or in that time period of my life when I was going through whatever I was going through that was distracting me from school. There just wasn't anything that the teacher could have done. So I think when you're putting together these lessons, focusing on, okay, what do I need to do for these kids who are doing the front loading? Let me make sure I have the stuff for them. And let me make sure that I have the supports in place for the kids who prefer not to put in a lot of work up front. They want to wait and see and use the mastery process to really master it, rather than, doing that work up front. Think about those two groups of kids and plan your lessons for them. And that doesn't mean that you give up on the other kids. But I think you can kind of release yourself from this idea that if you just offered them enough support, they would somehow get on board.
That's good advice.
It's a mindset shift. So you're not actually necessarily doing something different. You're just thinking about it different. And I think when you're planning your lessons, that will enable you to find a stopping point. Because if you keep planning until you find something that's going to work for the kids who are more disengaged and who aren't willing to put in at least as much effort as you are, then you're just going to keep planning forever. But if you can stop when you feel like you have enough for those kids, in those first two groups, when you have a reasonable amount of supports in place, I think that would help a bit. Tell me how you're feeling about all of that, because that was a lot of talking I just did.
It is a release, because as a teacher, you want to do the best for all the students that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's freeing
Mm-hmm.
to be able to think about it like that, because the things that I'm doing are meeting the needs of those two groups,
Mm-hmm.
and probably more than a lot of teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And they're meeting the needs of my IEP students and my 504 students.
Mm.
So I would have to say what I'm doing without having to do all the extra is already good enough.
Mm.
And I think that will help me.
What percentage of your class do you think falls in those categories? You talked about meeting the needs of the IEP, kids with IEPs and all that kind of stuff. What percentage of kids do you think are just not, or their needs are not being met, and what percentage are?
Well, I mean, are we talking about needs based on their engagement, or?
I'm thinking about whatever you have in mind when you're planning your lessons and you're trying to figure out, is this enough? When you look at this lesson, you think, what percentage of kids are going to be able to get results from this, or to learn from this, or move forward with this?
I would say if they're putting forth effort, all of them, because I
Mm-hmm.
always have a presentation, usually with guided notes. I have and then we do discussion. So we talk about it as we take the notes. So you're getting the visual, you're getting the auditory, and then we do some kind of a demonstration or a lab to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like, for the majority of them, they get to see it in different ways. We draw pictures. I teach chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
I teach science. So we do a lot. And feedback we get from our high school is what we're doing in science in the middle school is making a huge difference in science in the high school.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's kind of the best feedback you can get.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. And there will always be individual kids who they're just not there. They're just not there. And I can tell that you care a lot about your students, and, you really try to understand them and build rapport with them, and, addressing some of those issues that they come into the classroom with, if they've been impacted by trauma and that's keeping them from learning, that's something to keep in mind. But ultimately, you have to release yourself from this pressure to create this lesson that's going to work for 100% of kids 100% of time, because it just doesn't exist.
And I'm sure I know it, but I'm just one that needs to be reminded.
Yep. Yes, exactly. Because when it's just you telling yourself that, sometimes it can feel like, oh, maybe I'm just slacking, or maybe this isn't right. But to hear someone else sort of validating that, I know what you mean. It can really help you release some of that pressure from yourself. Not the pressure to try, because you'll always try, because that's what good teachers do. You don't give up on kids.
Yes.
But to release yourself from feeling responsible for showing up for them. And when you feel yourself crossing over into that territory where you're doing more work than they are, and you are putting in more effort than they are, that's when it's okay to draw the boundary. Because in any relationship, there has to be both parties giving. It can't just be one person always pursuing, and the other person just takes, right? There has to be where we're going to meet someplace in the middle. It may not be exactly 50-50 in the middle, but I'm at least moving toward you and you're moving toward me. And when you have students who aren't moving toward you, you are not obligated to go, the 99% for them so that they only have to take that one step. It isn't tenable. You can't do that when you have all of those kids. There's only so much that you can offer them. And it's okay. It's okay that that's all you can do. And it doesn't necessarily mean, I share the example of myself, because I think sometimes as a teacher, it's really discouraging when you see kids who aren't working to their potential, and you just feel like, oh my gosh, this is just such a waste. This kid could really do so much with their life. And, if only they would just X, Y, and Z. And just because we don't see that in our classrooms this year doesn't mean it won't happen.
Oh,
sometimes for some kids, it just kicks in later.
Yes, and I've seen that. I've seen that a lot. This is my 16th year teaching. So yes, when they come back, and I actually had a kid this week come back and say, Mrs. Reeves, I didn't realize all the stuff you were teaching me last year, but my chemistry class is so easy this year.
Mm.
And so, but he was one that he never reached the mastery in everything. And he didn't do the work all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's good. I know what I'm doing is good.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Keep planting those seeds,
Yes.
and trusting that just because they're not getting to 90% mastery, which is, I mean, that's a benchmark that was set by the school or the district or whoever, based on curriculum that was created by someone somewhere. That's not every child develops at the same rate. Not every kid is in the same place. Not every kid is going to achieve at the same level. So these are all kind of arbitrary standards that we've set because we think it's going to meet the needs for most kids. And it's okay if certain kids aren't there. Because you are still planting those seeds. And as long as you keep that in mind, that what you're doing is making a difference, even if they're not achieving at the level that, that the standards are saying they should be achieving at, or even at the level they're capable of, remembering that they can still go on and do great things, and you're impacting them in ways that you're not seeing, can keep you from getting discouraged or feeling like you want to give up, or which is, I think, probably the more common reaction for you. It sounds like it just drives you to want to work harder. You just want to put in more effort for them. But remembering that you're not responsible for this and that you're doing great work that is going to pay off for them later in ways that you don't see will keep you from feeling like, oh my goodness, this kid is just not going to ever be ready for high school or not going to be ready for a career. You're one person. You're one person in this student's life. And, you do the best that you can in that one time period, and trust that all of that hard work and all of that rapport that you're building with these kids is going to pay off later, even if they're not at that 90 percentile, that you have still done your job because you've shown up every day and you've given 100%. You've done what you can do. And that's really all that you can ask of yourself. And think about their success in a different way. Their success is not necessarily 90% mastery here. It's, what kind of people are they going to grow up to be? What are they going to contribute to the world? And did my work as a teacher push them in the right direction? Did I model the right things for them? Did I give them the right example? Did I impart some wisdom to them that they can take with them that will help them be amazing citizens and great people in the world? And if I've done that, then ultimately I've done my job.
Well, I think not perfect, but I'm on the right track. I guess I think when I think about this group of kids that I'm really trying to meet, our school is really wanting to focus on gap closing. These are the kids that are that we need to close the gap on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that probably adds to my wheel spinning.
Mm-hmm. But I don't think that the closing the gap is going to come from you producing even more amazing lessons. I think the closing the gap is going to come from the other things that have nothing to do with science whatsoever. From, depending on who are the kids in your classroom, as I said, trauma-informed teaching, might be culturally responsive teaching, might be restorative justice. It's all those other things that are keeping them from, systemically, institutionally, structurally, whatever the things in their home life, whatever are the other things that are keeping them from being able to achieve at their full potential. That's probably what's going to make the biggest difference versus just having better lessons. Because it sounds like your lessons are really awesome already. They're just not, the kids just aren't able to show up in a way that they're able to benefit from them.
Got it. Okay. Well, that just makes it even easier to step back.
Yes.
And we've been working on culture. We've been talking a lot about trauma. I guess we haven't been doing it long enough to actually see the results, because it takes a while.
That's right. It does. You're building trust. And, these aren't magic solutions. It's not a behavior system. It's just a lens through which you are able to respond to your students and create a safe place where they feel like they can take risks, where it's okay to fail, where they can try. And if they don't meet their goal, that it's okay. You're still going to be by their side and support them. And all of that kind of stuff. It takes a while, and it's not, you're not responsible for all of that. You can't fix all of that. You're just showing up the best way that you can so that they can show up the best way they can.
Well, then I'm doing a lot of good things, and then I have a lot of things that I can step back on so that I can do other things with that time.
Yep, exactly.
This has been so beneficial. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
A big thanks to you all for listening to this all the way through. I would love to hear your feedback and thoughts. Head over to truthforteachers.com and go to episode 151 to let me know how you make a decision about what is enough. Have a great week. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. Want more than just a weekly podcast episode from me? I'd love to also send you a weekly message of encouragement via email. I'll reach out each Sunday evening with a short message that's designed to help you feel more prepared and inspired and motivated for the week ahead. It's not a newsletter or a bunch of announcements. This goes out to over 85,000 educators. So I put just as much thought into crafting this weekly written message to my email list as I do into crafting my podcast episodes. And it's entirely unique content that you won't find anywhere else online. Just go to thecornerstoneforteachers.com/subscribe and you can sign up. That's thecornerstoneforteachers.com/subscribe.